Hello, thank you for joining us and welcome to this fantastic event, an in-confidence session with a really engaging and insightful speaker as part of this very important Housing Choice Conference. We're here today with Sabir Zazai of the Scottish Refugee Council and many more as well on top of that. I'll hand over to him in a moment to introduce himself, but I'd like to introduce myself to you as well. My name is Kirsteen Paterson. I'm a journalist with the National and Sunday National newspapers. And as much as I'm reporting on housing and immigration issues, I'm also learning all the time about them. So I'm really keen to see what Sabir has to tell us today. Sabir, can I hand over to yourself for an introduction, please?
Yeah, thanks, Kirsteen. I'm delighted to be connected here with so many colleagues working in this very important area of housing and homelessness. And first of all, I'd like to say thanks to everyone for bringing us all together. I'm sure events like this will take quite a lot of efforts and time and energy, especially when they're done remotely. So my name is Sabir Zazai. I'm the Chief Executive of Scottish Refugee Council. I've worked with refugees for a long time, but also I've been through the journey of asylum and integration, and myself having fled the conflict in Afghanistan about 20 years ago. Yeah, I'm proud and delighted to be part of such a brilliant team at Scottish Refugee Council, but also being part of such a vibrant and engaging voluntary sector here in Scotland, making lives better for those people who are seeking protection and sanctuary in our communities.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Sabir, for taking us through that. So you have very generously agreed to join us today to share your reflections on current events, to talk a bit about your journey from Afghanistan, and to discuss with us what a fairer way forward in Scotland would look like. We've got a number of different areas that we want to get across, and we've got absolutely bags to talk about. Let's start off by talking a bit about the New Scots integration strategy. So the Scottish Refugee Council was a partner in developing this in 2018, along with COSLA, which is of course the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities, and the Scottish Government. The New Scots strategy states that Scotland is a place of safety for everyone, and it has been endorsed by the United Nations Refugee Agency. Can you explain a bit about the impact that you feel that strategy has had since its introduction? Can you tell us, secondly, what you think has to happen now? And then also in beyond 2022, which is the end point of the current strategy?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd like to say that the strategy in a nutshell is Scotland's offer and commitment to refugees, which is very, very important. A society showing that very clear commitment to how it welcomes its new citizens, or new Scots, as we refer to people in that strategy. I think, it provides a very important platform for a number of partners, including the voluntary sector, the public sector, and others, to come together and work in partnership. Because when people are forced to flee their homes, Kirsteen, it takes all of us to work together to restore their dignity, their confidence, and to help people rebuild their lives. It's not the job of one organization or one individual to make lives better for people who are fleeing dreadful conflicts, human rights violations, and persecution. It takes a lot of time, effort, and creativity and innovation for many different partners and players to work together to make that offer as welcoming and as warm as it could be. So the New Scots Refugee Integration Strategy, first of all, provides that really helpful platform in which Scotland as a society, as a country, makes clear commitments as to how we treat our new neighbours, our new friends, and our new colleagues. I think within that, there are clear commitments towards a rights-based approach, because we want everyone to be treated fairly and equally, irrespective of their background or where they come from. And I think the other ambition within the strategy is also integration from day one. We don't want to get into the nitty-gritties of where people's status are and whether they're still seeking asylum. But as long as somebody is in Scotland, we should be able for them to have access to all their rights, but also for their journey of integration to start from day one. Well, obviously, there are some challenges within that, because the immigration aspect of that strategy, or the immigration overall, is reserved to the UK government. But integration is devolved. And I think it's important for us to reflect on what is within our gift to make that welcome more positive and more efficient and effective for people seeking protection here. And what else the Scottish government and all of us can do to make sure that the offer of integration and that journey of integration is as smooth and straightforward, so that people can rebuild their lives. They can be proud Scots, but at the same time, they can make contributions to our communities, because everyone arrives with a lot of skills, talents, and potential to make a contribution to Scotland. I think if we reflect on the impact of this strategy, I think it's fair to say that it has been successful in providing a way forward for Scottish public and third sector to navigate a complex and shifting refugee protection landscape. And I think the second point is also that the strategy has provided a consistent, applied, shared language to talk about refugees and developments such as the Afghan resettlement now, the Parkin tragedies and incidents, and also the Syrian resettlement. So we've got a platform that we can adapt and is flexible in helping us to shape our response to developments within the refugee sphere. I think that is a very important contribution, because in a sense, the refugee sector or the refugee world is changing. Every day there is an event or something happening, the Afghan crisis, the Syrian crisis, there will be other crises in the future. I think Scotland's preparedness within that strategy is very, very important. But however, I agree, I think we should say that there is room for improvement. Scotland is not perfect just with that strategy. There is room for improvement and implementation, and perhaps given the resources put into the strategy, it really needs to be delivering more than it currently is. And I think work still needs to happen, including resourcing, but also identifying and being more clear crystal about what is within our gift here in Scotland, what is reserved to the UK government, and the stuff that are within our gift. How do we progress with those better, so that we make lives better for people seeking protection here? I think that differentiation is very, very important, and the strategy is very relevant now, and I think in the longer term as well. We don't want to get to a cliff edge and say that warm welcome that Scotland aims to offer to people and that hand of friendship should get to some kind of a cliff edge and end, because the refugee crisis, or refugees, will be there based on the conflicts that we see, and the not just people fleeing wars, but people will be fleeing poverty, people will be fleeing climate change, people will be fleeing lots of other adversities. And I think Scotland needs to, in this really critical time, maintain that long-standing legacy of reaching out to people seeking protection. I think having a strategy is better than not having a plan. So currently as well, I think the strategy is very important for us to promote that strategy as a more dignified and humane approach to integrating refugees, as opposed to what the Borders and Immigration Bill is proposing, which is locking people away in barracks and institutional accommodation. I think we need to, in Scotland, be able to offer that alternative working model which works for the communities and also works for the people who are seeking protection within our communities and neighborhoods. So I think longer term, the strategy is very, very important for us. And the 20 years of learning that we have, but also the two strategies that were developed, I think there's a lot of learning in that to develop an alternative, more humane and dignified community integration model against what is being proposed through the anti-refugee bill.
Okay, within that answer, you touched a bit on devolved and reserved powers, and I think we can touch a wee bit more on that later on in the session. But what I'd like to ask you about now is the crisis that's engulfing Afghanistan and the change that we're still seeing there. That's put displacement of people and refugee issues into the headlines again, which is, as we all know, is not always the case. Your organisation has called for action from the UK government over this. It retains responsibility for immigration policy. What is the most urgent action needed in response to the crisis, and how can we expedite another one of your aims, which is a global and inclusive resettlement approach in the longer term?
Well, first of all, I must say to the audience and yourself that the Afghan crisis is very close to me, because I fled Afghanistan and I've still got family there. What happened in Afghanistan a month or so ago opened up old wounds and brought back all the dreadful memories of surviving the war in Afghanistan 20 odd years ago, fleeing the conflict, and then that kind of refugee flight. It brought everything together, including PTSD and the anxieties and everything, and that concern and worry that I have for my own family, for others in Afghanistan, but also all the rights and things that we take for granted here, the things that people will no longer have in Afghanistan. So it is a situation that I keep a very close eye on, and it has reminded me as a former refugee that you may flee a conflict, but I think the sufferings of that conflict and what happens there can haunt you for many, many generations to come. So the life of a refugee does not end with just getting to safety. It was a very sad reminder. In terms of your question, Kirsteen, the events in Afghanistan is a very powerful reminder as to how things can change for people and communities. People in Afghanistan never expected a regime change. Even the Taliban were not prepared as a government to take over Afghanistan. It happened in a flip second, and things changed. People's lives changed. People who were fighting against the Taliban for 20 years had to flee for their lives. And it just reminded us how important that is, that the refugee flight is not organized or planned, or you don't plan it. Things can happen in few seconds, and lives can change, and people's lives can turn around, and they need protection. I think we need to have systems in place to respond to that, and that's what we have been advocating as Scotland's Refugee Agency with the Home Office since 2020 to come up with a longer term resettlement program, a global resettlement program that could respond to events like Afghanistan. But sadly, that did not happen, and we didn't have systems in place. And the UK government and the Home Office has set up this various Afghan resettlement schemes, one for the interpreters and others and so on. But I think that could have been done in a more structured manner, building on the successful resettlement program for the Syrian refugees, although the situation of the Afghan refugees is very different to the Syrian refugees. But we could have had a workable and assessed and piloted program in place to respond to resettlement needs of the Afghans, but also other communities in the longer term as well. So that is one call we've put in to say that we have a global refugee resettlement program in place that could respond to events like the one in Afghanistan. We've also called for expedited process of granting all Afghans in the asylum system, whether waiting for a decision or refused or detained, which is sort of like, in terms of a figure, we'd be looking at about 3,000 to 3,600 people. They should be given immediate refugee leave or humanitarian protection, so that that whatever that burden is on the system, that can be reduced. I know the Home Office and the UK government is talking about housing shortages, pressure on the asylum system, and these people, if they're granted status, because there's no way of sending them back to Afghanistan, because those people, obviously, most of them will be fleeing the Taliban, and now the Taliban in power it's clear that there is no way for these people to be repatriated to Afghanistan, no matter where their case is. So it's important that these people get status, they get their right to work, and they start contributing to our society and also rebuild their lives. So keeping those people in the system at this current time is putting pressure on the system, but on the other side, we are also depriving people for their right to a dignified income or for rebuilding their lives. We've also called for the country guidance on Afghanistan to change immediately, because that needs to be updated, and there should be no returns to Afghanistan under this current regime. We also think that the relocation, we've also asked for the relocation and resettlement schemes to be coordinated nationally against agreed standards, as currently accommodation delay in so-called the bridging hotels are a major worry. There could be possibilities of people staying in hotels for up to 6 months. So just imagine for a moment that in a minute or so, your life changed. You were going to work, you were living in your family home in Kabul, in Afghanistan, and then all of a sudden you had to flee. You ended up here in Scotland, you left everything behind, and the next thing you're told is that you might stay in that hotel for up to 6 months. And what does that mean to your mental health, well-being, sense of belonging, dignity, and everything? I know it's all well meant, what is being done to welcome and support these people, and I do really value that and respect what our officials, the Home Office and others are doing to help and support people in a really critical time. But I think if, in the absence of a coordinated relocation scheme, I think there is potential for people falling through the cracks and then feeding into the number of homelessness, destitution, and others, which obviously this conference is aimed at. There are important differences, as I said earlier as well, between the Syrian resettlement and the Afghan resettlement schemes, including the Afghan interpreters and others. And I think we need the Scottish government to I think at local level, we need the Scottish government as well to convene a national coordination approach to this. I think it's very, very important that there is a multi-agency task force set up so that people get all the right support and have access to all their rights as earlier on as possible, because it's in those early days that people need that vital support, advice, and guidance. And I think if that is delayed, there is a potential for people getting into problems longer term, which will then have an impact on all of us.
Yeah, definitely. So the Scottish Refugee Council has worked with Homeless Network Scotland and other partners to develop Fairway Scotland, which is a really exciting new development, and I'd really love to ask you a bit about it. Its aim is to design out destitution and homelessness among people who have no recourse to public funds in Scotland. So Sabir, what can you tell us about that, and what urgent measures need to be in place to ensure that no one in Scotland has to worry about having a safe place to live?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I'm really proud of the work that has been done in this area, particularly the collaboration. Kirsteen, we came together in a really difficult time where we couldn't see one another face to face. All of the meetings and the network meetings, and also the meetings of the Fairway Scotland, and that process of development, to me, in this, against the context of COVID, remote working, working from our rooms and bedrooms and kitchens, it is a big leadership lesson. Our leaders in the sector, all the partners within this collective, coming together at a time when we were all struggling individually and organisationally to think about a better way, a way forward for Scotland. I think that needs to be commended and registered with everyone. I think there is a real leadership lesson as to how the sector responded. And I think us coming together and coming up with this concept, a workable concept, I think it says a lot about the sector here in Scotland and also the leaders that are involved in this. So I'd really commend that work. I think what is really important in this process is that whilst we have the network and the development of the Fairway Scotland, what is really needed is not just having another plan, vision or strategy. I think it needs a swift investment from Scottish Government and also other charity funders to implement the Fairway Scotland on ground, because it's a 5-year plan. We cannot wait too long for it to be implemented, and also then look at the learning, because we want to learn from this as well. So it's important that it is invested in as soon as possible, because we really want to learn from this model. As I said, yes, it is a brilliant partnership which is happening sadly in a time of a perfect storm of hardening hostile environment, and also the anti-refugee bill, which I mentioned earlier, will potentially create more homelessness with COVID and Brexit. We now need action and investment in Fairway Scotland. Otherwise, ending destitution and homelessness strategies, as I said, will only be papers but not practice. Fairway Scotland is the way forward, not because we're all involved in, but I think because of that trust, credibility, and also the skills and potential that all the leaders and organizations bring, can be a model, a positive model, if it is invested in. I think we need to demonstrate, as I said earlier on as well, in response to one of your other questions, we need to demonstrate different, better, and credible approach in Scotland for the UK to learn from and to follow. Prevention, accommodation with advocacy and legal are essential. Otherwise, it is just kind of like, papers and talks. But we want Fairway Scotland, as I think it's got the right organisations and the right people involved. And I think if it is invested in, it could be a very good model for all of us to learn from and to follow. But most importantly, giving people a roof above their head and giving them that guidance and advice at a very critical time, so that we avoid tragic instances like the Parkin and others, and make sure that people have the right support, because housing, advice and guidance, all of those are key to people to find to build better lives here in Scotland.
Thank you, Sabir. There's an increasing understanding of the value that people with lived experience bring to decision making on the issues that matter to them and to others, and that's across all branches of the public and third sectors. How important is this principle to you personally? And in what ways does the Scottish Refugee Council involve the people you represent in decision making and research to make sure that your organisation's policies and focus are informed by lived experiences?
I think lived experience plays a vital role in shaping our services and shaping our offer to help and support communities, not just refugees, but lots of other communities and groups. I think, lived experience plays a big part in that. But I think my worry is that, lived experience at times could become a tick box exercise, which is not good enough. You can't just have a group of refugees and speak with them when you are developing a service and then you don't see them again. Or you cannot bring together a group of people from a disability background or any other backgrounds and say, we want to set up a service for you, and then you never see them again. That is just like politicians coming to us at the time of elections or any other important occasions. So what lived experience works, it can work. It can only work when lived experience is in the driving seat and in decision making, not just shaping and forming services. So what we've done at Scottish Refugee Council is that we've made a bold commitment to lived experiences at every level of the organisation, including a commitment to a minimum number of people from refugee backgrounds to be on our board. Well, I come from a refugee background. I've got the lived experience, but I'm proud to work with a lot of other people within the organisation at all levels, from a head of services to a head of funding development to many others, and even board members. Our vice chair comes from a refugee background. At all levels, these people are involved in key decision making. I think we're not perfect. We're still learning in this area, but what is really important and vital is that we've made a strategic commitment within our strategic plan to engage better with refugees, to engage refugees in decision making within the organisation, not just in shaping and developing our services. So we have a team of varied lived and learned experiences at Scottish Refugee Council, because the learned experience is also very, very important. I'm not suggesting for one moment that everyone working in the homelessness sector should have lived experiences of the homelessness. Well, that would be great, but I think the learned experiences of people who've worked within the homelessness sector for many years is also very important. I think if we bring the lived and learned experiences together, that is when we can make the offer a lot more efficient, effective, and also one that is based on responding to needs, and it's a solution-focused offer. So not just a tick box exercise, but I think, lived experience in that driving seat and decision making. And also, I think if there are people within your organizations and settings who are from a lived experience background, that people are valued, and not just that you expect people to be just grateful for that opportunity. They're valued, they're invested in, and they're developed. And I think, there is a need for a clear commitment by all sectors and all organizations to make strategic level commitment to lived experiences. We talked about lived experiences in Fairway Scotland. We talked about lived experiences in the social advisory group of the Scottish Government, which is great. I think every setting that I've been engaged in, lived experience has played an important role. I think that is great to know that. But I think what is missing within this setting is that when we come together as a collective, we talk about lived experience, but when we step away from that, as individual organizations, I think it's also important at that level as well, that each and every one of us have our own individual organizational commitment to lived experiences. and at strategic level with CLIC. I think also in light of the events that evolved after the Black Lives Matter as well. We had a board level conversations to see what else we can do as an organization, even in terms of equalities, in terms of decision making, and where the voice of our lived experience is not just one that informs shaping and designing our services, but also is involved in key decision making as well.
Okay, thank you very much. So as Jenny is mentioning to everyone, if we have any questions from the audience for Sabir, we'd be delighted to get across them in the minutes that we have left. We are here until 2:15. I do have one further thing that I will ask him quickly, just in case anyone does want to come in, which is just with regards to the dispersals to Glasgow that we saw in the early 2000s. Scotland was the only partner in the UK at that time for asylum dispersal, and many of the people who settled in the city during those years are now still here. They're part of communities, their children have grown up here. What are your hopes for the future as these children leave education, move into jobs and into positions of influence?
I think first of all, I'd like to look back, Kirsteen, if that is possible. 20 years ago, Glasgow opened its doors to people seeking asylum, particularly young people. I think if you look back and look to today from that time, what this warm welcome and that opening of doors has given Glasgow is Glasgow Girls, Refugees for Justice, and many other organizations and collectives of people who sought protection here, mostly as young people with families or without families, today are living Glasgow's values and principles of standing up for the rights of marginalized and vulnerable communities. I think Glasgow Girls is a brilliant outcome of that dispersal, and its reputation travels well beyond Scotland, the UK, and around the world. So we also have Refugees for Justice. We've got a number of other initiatives led by people who sought protection in this city through the dispersal. These are people who now turning their own experiences of sufferings into hope for others. I think that is a great investment. I think what I see as a relatively new person to Glasgow is that these people are as Glaswegian as anyone else. And the values of socialism, the values of standing up for the rights of others are fully embedded in them. I think they're standing up for others. I think I can mention several names here, but there's lots of people that inspire me who sought protection here, and today they are helping us to make lives better for others. So that is very, very important to note. And I think that is what we can learn from as well. I think the world needs to come to Glasgow to learn how we have welcomed and how we've transformed our new Scots into Glaswegians and into our new Scots. And I think that is really important learning. Going forward, I think, and as these people now get to level where they want to contribute, they want to be to have a dignified income like all of us, I think it's on all of us within our organizations to see how do we ensure that our organizations, our settings, our boards, our teams reflect the diversity of today's Glasgow. I think that is a commitment we all need to make. We want to make sure that we benefit from the skills and potentials of these people, their resilience, their courage, and their hope for a better life. So we want to be a city that is not moving people from war into poverty, but we are moving people from war into prosperity. And I think that is very important, because when refugees prosper, when refugee children prosper, we all prosper, and we all do well. So it's very, very important that we give these people opportunities, we empower them, and we send a very strong message that they have as much of a role to play as anyone else, and that Glasgow and Scotland is as much their home as anyone else's.
Sabir, thank you very much. That was, as always, beautifully put. I'd really like to thank you for coming along and giving us your time today. And I'd really like to thank Homeless Network Scotland for inviting me to participate as well. We do have a couple of moments left if anyone does want to ask a final question, but we've got some really great comments in the chat as well if you want to peruse them at all. We have one here from, sorry, just let me scroll. We have one here from Duncan Easton, who says that, as with all people ending up homeless, I find lived experience is a key factor in bringing homelessness to an end. It's the richest source of information at our disposal. And I agree with David Pentland. I love that sentiment too. If there's anyone who does want to ask a question, please do come forward now. It's been really lovely being able to speak in front of you guys, and I hope that you've gotten a lot out of the session. Sabir, do you have any kind of closing remarks?
No, I'm just thankful to everyone and touched and grateful that so many people have come together despite the various challenges on this really important subject. And I think it gives me hope that whilst what we do, not everything is perfect, but I think that we have the right people in the room, the right sentiment and the right vision. I think that will give us the opportunity to help and support people through some really difficult and challenging times that at times are not easy to even imagine, not having somewhere to stay, not having a roof above your head, and going through the complexities of an asylum system, which is increasingly hostile. So seeing so many people in the room just gives me hope that maybe things are not looking good, but it does give me hope that there are so many people working in this sector. And I'm, for once, very proud to be colleagues and friends with many familiar faces and new faces. And I'm delighted to be part of this team.
Great. Thanks again, and thanks to all of you for coming along today.